Disruptors, welcome, welcome. I am Alina Kokorotzis, the license holder for DisruptHR Rochester and the host for today's conversation. At DisruptHR Rochester, our mission is to ignite conversations that inspire positive change in organizations and the communities we lead. And today we're driving into an awesome topic that is dear to my heart as a coach. How can coaching be a force for disruption and transformation in the workplace? And I'm joined today by this amazing panel and certified ICF coaches. And first, here, my fellow Disrupt HR member, Caitlin Drago, who is a prior speaker, a sponsor, and now a speaker coach for Disrupt HR Rochester. And she's also the owner of Inspire Improv and Coaching Inc. Also, Mark Brewer, president of the Upstate New York International Coaching Federation chapter, a leadership and a team coach, and the owner of Mark Brewer LLC. And last but not least, Becky D'Angelo Beach, right? I got that right?
You got
Coach,
it.
writer, educator, and she is the owner of BDV Coaching. So let's start with some introductions, Caitlin.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Alina. So I provide one-on-one leadership coaching, and I also work with teams to really help create cultures of empathy and creativity and trust, starting with how we communicate and connect with one another. I have a background in theater and improv, so I use a lot of improv principles as a platform for interactive learning.
Mark?
Good morning, Alina and everyone else. My name is Mark Brewer. I am a certified ICF International Coaching Federation coach, and I coach teams and organizations and individuals. And my career has primarily been in the nonprofit world. So I work with nonprofits and with government agencies, helping them develop their leadership and develop their abilities to develop relationships and enhance those relationships so that the workplace becomes an even better place. So that's what I do as a coach. And I'm the president of the ICF Upstate New York Charter Chapter.
And Becky.
Yes. Hi, I'm Becky D'Angelovich, and I'm an ICF ACC coach, and I'm an at-large board member of the Upstate New York chapter of ICF. I've been in coaching for about 4 years after an almost 25-year career working in faith formation and Christian education in mostly progressive mainline congregations. And in coaching, I love to work with nonprofit and other church leaders, and also cohorts of educators and pastors and church professionals who are just looking to kind of think out of the box and be more adaptive and responsive to the ever-changing landscape of ministry and nonprofit leadership.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So before we kind of get into, our topic as to like how coaching is a force for disruption, maybe Mark, could you share a little bit about ICF? What does it mean? How is it different maybe from mentoring, consulting, or therapy? And, you know, just what does it mean to be an ICF certified coach too?
Thanks, Alina. That's a great question. ICF stands for the International Coaching Federation. It's the organization that oversees the coaching industry throughout the world. I believe there's over 65,000 coaches in the ICF, and the four of us here are also part of that. And we're the ICF Upstate New York chapter. We have been in existence since about 2018. So we're one of the younger chapters. Some of the other chapters have been around. Coaching has been around for at least, I think, 30 to 40 years. And some of the chapters are older. But we, as a chapter, we have about 225 members here throughout the Upstate New York region. The Rochester region has probably a greater portion of those coaches. I want to say maybe around 60 of the coaches in the chapter live in the Rochester, New York, and I'll say maybe the Finger Lakes region as well. But the ICF is kind of the gold standard bearer for the coaching industry. So there are coaching programs that are ICF certified, meaning that if you go through that coaching program to become a coach, you're going through a program that is credentialed by the ICF, that there are standards that have to be met within that coaching program. And so there's usually, a certain number of hours that you're meeting within those programs. You are also probably getting exposed to what we call peer coaching, where two people are coaching each other, and then also some mentor coaching as well. So it provides the standards for making sure that coaches are trained properly to be coaches. And so it's really a great organization, I believe, because it holds me accountable to certain standards. I like the fact that I'm doing continuing education on a routine basis for my coaching to really elevate and inspire and to ignite, if I can use that word, my own creativity as a coach. And then holding me to a code of ethics as well. And then there are certain core competencies that we have to know as coaches. So there's a lot to the ICF, but I think what it does is it really elevates the standards of coaching and how we are practicing and even showing up as human individuals and as coaches.
I love that. And I love that you use the word ignite because I think we're all recovering from Disrupt HR. Last week, we had our big event of the year with some amazing speakers that really ignited this conversation. A couple of months ago, we were all talking and it was an exciting opportunity for us to talk about how coaching could ignite conversations. How can coaching support organizations in maybe implementing change? And I think you both attended the event, and I can't wait, to hear your thoughts. But I know Caitlin and I, we definitely have this Disrupt HR hangover, as Caitlin calls it, that I've been quoting her. It was amazing. So exciting. We had over 300 participants at the Strong Museum of Play. And, very powerful questions throughout the different talks that came out. So, how do you guys think coaching disrupts this traditional thinking and different approaches maybe in organizations? Maybe we can start with that.
So I think that it's easy to get stuck in our patterns and our typical thinking. And what coaching does is it provides a space for someone to step into and have that thinking be challenged through powerful questions and through somebody who is outside of that particular situation to be able to provide that outside perspective so that they can challenge your thinking and disrupt those patterns that we might sometimes get stuck in.
I would agree. I think that what was presented in the 6 presenters there was a lot of great information. And I think what happens is, with the theme again, with igniting, by what they present, then gives a lot of igniting to those of us sitting out there in the audience, some different ideas on how to look at HR and how that function kind of has, played itself out through the decades. But then what are some of the different things that we can do? And I think coaching would allow, a coach to sit with an individual to really kind of deep dive into some of these ideas that they heard that maybe they were inspired by. So for example, in the talk about performance feedback, she used the phrase preventable failures. Well, that's a great little phrase to have a coaching conversation with someone about preventable failures, to say to them, what does that mean to you? And what comes to mind when you hear that phrase, preventable failures, so that they can start kind of thinking about it. And one of the coaching tools that I use is called a pre-mortem. You know how we do a post-mortem for things? You can do a pre-mortem. So you would think about, a new idea. And then the question to yourself, and maybe your team of people, is to say, okay, this particular idea has epically failed. What has happened? What went wrong with this? So that you kind of do this conversation around, here are the things that could potentially present itself as a failure of this particular idea. And so by doing that, you kind of help yourself and your team kind of maybe mitigate some of those failures that could happen. So when she said that, I was like, oh my God, that's a great kind of coaching conversation around, helping a client and maybe even a team of people talk about what could be the potential failures for this great new idea that you're trying to implement.
And I kind of saw the whole structure of the event really playing into what I think one of the key beliefs of coaching is, and that is that the wisdom is with the coachee. I'm not coming in as some consultant that's going to give you a perfect system that you plug into. And in the same way, Disrupt did not bring some big name speaker from out of the area to tell people how to do HR. Instead, they tapped into the massive amount of wisdom that is within this organization, within this community, and really lifted that up. Like this expertise that folks have both for their own context, but also how each person in that room might hear that and figure out, oh, so what could I bring? What of this will work in my context?
I think Becky brings up a great point about coaching in that we are not coming in as any kind of subject matter expert around something. We're not coming in as a mentor or a consultant that, like Becky said, would be handing out, here's the 5-step process to do something, or here are the parameters on how you should be doing this. We certainly come in as coaches in that field of expertise, being able to help bring out in them that which I think we hold in our own selves as coaches as that potential, and all of that good information and good ideas is all going to come out of them, the coachee, whoever they may be, or even as a group of people.
And Becky and Mark, when we had our conversations leading up to the event itself, you both had some really, really great metaphors for the difference between coaching and mentoring and consulting. Could you share those again for the benefit of everybody?
Well, the one that I'll often use is that for between coaching and say therapy, which a lot of people say, oh, are you like a therapist? Is that therapy is like archaeology, in that we're going to be really curious and look at the past and explore it to help us learn and be able to move forward, which is great and really appropriate. And that's not what coaching is. Where coaching, we often talk about it being like architecture, creating plans to build what's next, to move forward. So they're both super important modalities, and many people maybe should work with both of them. But I always point out to my clients that, I'm not trained to be your therapist. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time in the past. We're going to look forward and see what we can build. And I love the one Mark had. In fact, I've used it since I heard it.
My metaphor is, consulting and coaching are like physical therapy and personal training. So therapy and coaching are like physical therapy and personal training. So therapy, like the physical therapist, is working with you, and maybe there's a certain level of injury or dysfunction that they are going to use their modalities and their therapeutic interventions to help you get back to a place of being able to function well within your own life. And that's certainly what physical therapy does. But coaching is like personal training. So you would go to a personal trainer when you're like, okay, everything's working okay. I want to lose weight, or I want to really tone up. And so I will go to a personal trainer who can help me set goals and give me some guidance and some coaching around, working on this goal that I'm striving for. That's what we do as coaches as well. So they're pretty unique metaphors, but I think they kind of help people understand maybe the difference between the different fields.
So Becky, you made me think when you mentioned, the type of speakers that come to Disrupt. And, we have a whole process of identifying speakers, speaker applications, and kind of looking at topics that align with the theme. And, this year's theme, as I mentioned before, it's this igniting the future and leading the way. And we came up with a theme because I truly think we have innovators and doers and thinkers in the Rochester area, and a lot of the speakers, all of them, they are speakers who are not keynote speakers. They're voices who we wanted to amplify because their topics and messages were so powerful as you experienced. So, but I was hoping that all of our collaborations, with Disrupt and our sponsors and our vendors and the people who like ICF, and like NHRA and ATD, our other HR organizations, that we are partnering in a way that we are awakening this potential that our city has and our region has. Um, but coaching, I think, when I think of coaching and the powerful questions that you can ask individuals to ignite that thinking, ignite that, the kind of the wheels to start, turning. It's so important. And I think, Caitlin, you were watching and listening for some of those powerful questions that our speakers had to bring to the audience. Were there any questions that you were like, ooh, that was a good one?
Absolutely. I made a list. And just to give a little bit of a peek behind the curtain in terms of what we look for or what we think of as powerful questions within coaching, we try to stray away from closed questions, which is something that's going to elicit just a yes or a no. And we look at questions that start with, what, where, when, how, and we tend to stay away from why. The reason being that that word can, even if it's in the most neutral context possible, it can elicit that a negative reaction or a feeling of judgment. Well, why did you do that? It's like, well, you're judging me. And so instead we shift that over into, tell me a little bit more about what was going on there, or what was your thinking behind that? It just opens our brain up to more productive thought than shutting it down because we feel judged. All of that to say, some of the questions that I jotted down, talking about the performance feedback. Are you using feedback as a mirror or a weapon? Okay, that's a little bit of a closed-ended question, but it could elicit that answer of, oh, it is a weapon. Okay, well, tell me more about that. How will you stop blaming the employee and start fixing the problem? And just making the most out of your trip to the restroom. He asked the question, what do you think will happen? That thinking ahead, and what are the possibilities here? How do you think it will make people feel? And that small big no for a big yes. Does that simple question of, does something need to change? I thought that was interesting. And this is a good one too. What if the most radical thing we could do was to pause before we respond? And then the inspired hiring, the casting against type. Will you be willing to surprise yourself, throw caution to the wind, upset established dynamics in your hiring? Sure, that could be a yes or no. It could also be a moment for some really great follow-up. I'm like, well, tell me more about why that's a yes or a no. But yeah, there were some really, really powerful questions too. And to Mark's point of the preventable feedback, any one of those, you could have an entire conversation about.
Yeah, I think that the presenter about making the most of your trip to the restroom, one of his statements, not necessarily a question, was, ask them questions, don't tell them how to do it. And I think that is certainly a staple of what it means to be a coach. And as human beings, myself and all of us, but it's like there are times when I'm in a coaching appointment where I feel myself wanting to go to the tell them how to do it mode. And I have to step back and put my coaching hat on and say, what's the question you want to ask here, Mark? Because that's going to be more helpful than telling them how to do it. And I realize too, in coaching, sometimes that can be a frustrating aspect of the coachee because they're looking, well, just tell me how to do it. They want the answer. But I think when we can be really good at our craft of coaching, we can say, we can put that pause in there and say, before we get to the answer, let's go on a little journey here with a question versus, well, here's the answer. And that certainly can have validity in the end. But before we jump to the answer, let's do some exploration and experimentation first with some of the questioning that we can do.
Well, yeah, because that can bring up so much more. You can go so much deeper and even go, at a different kind of rabbit hole, I would say, that could be beneficial to uncovering all sorts of stuff. Becky, were there any questions that maybe came up as you were listening to the talks? And by the way, we will be sharing the talks very soon. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have the recorded versions, and I'll make sure I'll link them at this video too.
I was looking at, it was the managing triggers before they burn down. And the question that struck me is, how do your employees feel when they step into your office? That was one that Caitlin had jotted down. And I thought, gosh, a feeling question, not a head question. And in my coaching and actually in my work as an educator, the curiosity, I think, is so important, rather than, it's so easy to make a judgment or to decide what this client needs, but coming from this stance of just being curious. And so that question, how do your employees feel when they step into your office, is just inviting someone to adopt that stance of curiosity, of wondering, of empathy. And so I think you could just spend a whole coaching session just figuring out, as you answer that question, how you can just do your work. So that one to me was so rich.
And you're making me think, so how do coaches balance the challenging of the norms while still acting from that place of knowledge and wisdom?
Oh, yeah.
I think
Caitlin.
it comes partly to active listening and knowing that active listening isn't just listening to what the person is saying, it's listening to the tone of their voice. It's looking at their body language. And in a normal day-to-day, there might not be someone who can just be the observer of that behavior without being impacted by it. And so we're able to reflect that back. And we also sit in a place of privilege where I can poke, I can challenge in a way that someone who is this person's coworker might not be able to, because they're going to have to then they have to deal with the ramifications of working with that person who just asked them that really challenging question. And so it is a balance of taking in and noticing what this person is putting forth, and also asking those tough questions to help disrupt that thinking as well.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest qualities of a coach is curiosity. I think when a coach sits in a space of curiosity, and the other thing that I say too is that part of active listening, I think, is listening to understand versus listening to respond, as we've heard before. So for us, it is about not necessarily trying to form an answer, or maybe there is a forming of the question, but it's really about listening to understand. So, I mean, and maybe you certainly as coaches can relate to this, but I might be sitting in a coaching session with Becky and she's telling me something, and all of a sudden I see a smile come onto her face, and I might say, you know, Becky, can I make an observation? And she, because we, a lot of times as coaches, we will ask permission for things, so can I state an observation? And she say, sure. And I'll say, when you were just saying that, this little smile came onto your face. So tell me what's behind that smile. And maybe she wasn't aware of it. Maybe she was, I don't know. But for me, it was some kind of bodily indication that something happened in her that I'm trying to understand. And so I would ask her about that kind of a thing to see what else might be there as a coach.
Yeah. Or the opposite, right? Where you have maybe a much stronger emotion. Maybe they are, their eyes are filling up with tears, or, anything like that, that maybe they're suppressing pain or, challenges or thoughts that, maybe they didn't want to share. And that opens up the door for having that conversation and providing the support they need in that moment.
Which I think is
beautiful to see.
And that speaks to how, as coaches, we, I think it's important for us as coaches to be able to create a space, and more so a relationship with our coachees that is rooted in, trust and respect and care and compassion and understanding, so that, it can be, that transparency and vulnerability can be there. Because I think when we experience that, at least for myself, those are pretty significant moments. Those are, from my own background as a former priest, it's like that's pretty sacred. That's like standing on sacred ground there for me. So to be able to have someone, share or kind of express a bit of an emotion for themselves, for me is like, okay, I'm going to tread lightly here, but I want to, kind of go with them if that's where they want to go.
And that's, those are the moments, at least for me, those are the moments that remind me why I wanted to be in this profession too. And, looking back, those have been probably the best coaching conversations, the ones that you do notice that slight change in their body, language or emotion. And then it opens up the door for that trust, that rapport to even be built even more, because they're sharing and they're opening up.
I think that, even the talk that was the inspired hiring casting against type, because one of his statements was abandoning comfort. Well, how many people, we can say that, let's just, let's get uncomfortable here. Well, how uncomfortable do you want to go? And what happens to you when you go into that uncomfortable space? And what might be going on up here in your head when you think about going into that uncomfortable space? So before you even get there, let's talk about what could be going on in all of this in you that, kind of gives you maybe sometimes that emotional response about, doing something. Because, what he was talking about was really like, yeah, don't hire just because of the resume ticking off all the boxes, but hire for something maybe vastly different from what you've ever done before. That involves risk. Well, risk may be way outside of your comfort zone. Then what's it like then for you to go? Tell me about a time. This is a great coaching question. Tell me a time about when you took an incredible risk and it was really successful for you. Because sometimes we have to help our coachees remember that they probably have done some kind of risk in their life.
And I think that's where talent acquisition professionals, right, who I think would benefit from having coaching skills, because as they coach hiring managers to make these decisions about hiring, right, they can bring up these types of questions to prepare them to become uncomfortable. And it's a skill that I think every HR professional could benefit from in any function of HR, not just hiring, but that was an awesome talk, and I love the word uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And if anyone is listening to this and are wondering, well, how do I step in? How do I become a great coach? the talk about using your trip to the restroom. I'm looking for the actual title of it. Oh, making the most out of your trip to the restroom, coaching for leveraging informal networking moments. That is a great 5-minute encapsulation of how to bring coaching
Yeah,
into your day to day.
absolutely. Totally agree with that. Because he used a lot of some coaching, guide them, don't instruct them. I was like, yeah, that's such a kind of a coaching tenet that's what we're going to do. We can guide them certainly, but we don't necessarily instruct them because we want to cultivate, the instruction from within them. If that's because we want them to instruct themselves.
And how about the talk about, the coaching for trauma-informed leadership that Jordan, you had some good questions, Caitlin,
Well,
from.
I would just love to share from, some of the behind the scenes of this. She crafted this in such a way that she intentionally started with an example that would make your heart race of, did who needed who wanted to who got mad at someone on the road when you got here? Okay, that makes me think of that moment I got frustrated. Was there a time that your boss said something that made you, oh, it puts everyone into that space of maybe their hearts racing themselves. And then as she went through the talk, her intention was to both talk about, bringing managing those triggers and bringing yourself to a place of neutral. She did that through her tone of voice. She did that through her examples, so that by the end, everyone's heart was maybe a little bit more, slower paced. We could think a little bit more clearly. And so she both talked about the thing while also eliciting that response in the audience's actual like bodies and nervous, which I thought was just so, so cool. So cool.
Yeah, and what she brings up, I think, and this speaks right to coaching too. So one of the assessments that I give as a coach is the emotional intelligence 2.0, EQI 2.0. But with that, because in that, the statement that I wrote down was unchecked emotional responses can spread like wildfire. And that is so true. And then from another one of the talks was about having intentional moments of pause. So you and I can get triggered by something that happens beyond our control. That person in traffic, we have no control over. And then we get triggered. Can we put a pause in there and recognize that if we don't check in with our emotions, then we can spread something that's going to be destructive versus, having a different way of showing up in that particular situation.
Yeah, I guess I would just piggyback on that in another role I have as a yoga and meditation teacher. That sense of, okay, where are we finding that pause? Where are we disconnecting to kind of find our breath, find that bodily awareness? Earlier when we were talking about sort of the hallmarks of coaching, and active listening, I think actively attending to the silence in a session is also important. It's that built-in pause, is the silence, dealing with awkward silence in coaching, I think is something that coaches have to get through. But what are you noticing? Are they biting their lip? Are they looking off to the side? And a new question at that point is going to ruin whatever they're doing, right? Are they just sitting very anxiously and you just have to let it sit so they will articulate what's in there but is not maybe ready to come out or feels too scary to come out. So I think that pausing, that silence is so key to the process of impactful coaching.
And you're making me think as to like how we utilize coaching at Disrupt this year. because coaching has been part of Disrupt since Melanie Della Pietra, Melanie Russo now, brought Disrupt HR to Rochester back in 2018. And, we've always coached. And Caitlin, maybe you can share a little bit about the progression of coaching. But this year, what we tried was we did co-working sessions where all the coaches, we had 7 coaches, speaker coaches like Caitlin. We would take turns, and also the speakers would be in a room and co-work with each other, but also have the peer coaching and support each other. So they were getting feedback from the speakers, from each other, and from the coaches from Disrupt. Caitlin, thoughts? How did that go? I know we had like a couple of co-workings. We have 4 of them, I think, and we had a progression. And that pause and the quiet time was really important. So we had to make sure we embedded that throughout the co-working sessions.
Yeah. So how it used to be was each coach or each speaker would be assigned to a coach, and we would meet 3 or 4 times to help them work their talk. And that was great. And what happened was, by the time they showed up for the dress rehearsal and in the day of the actual event, they had one person who they felt like, okay, this person is on my side, they're cheering me on. And what I think was different about doing the co-working was that everyone had that opportunity to build those relationships, to cheer each other on, to get familiar with the content. And to Becky's point earlier about how there is all of this wealth of knowledge and wisdom within our community, it wasn't just this person getting my perspective. This person was getting a community's perspective to infuse both the content of their talk and the delivery of their talk. And we had to be really, one of the things we had to do, especially when it came to giving the feedback, was we had to lay that ground rule of there are a lot of perspectives here, and we're not expecting you to take every single perspective and put that into your talk. Take what's helpful and what's resonating with you and what's disruptive for you, and put that into that talk. But I think what happened at the very end, when it came to the event itself, was that they felt like they had an entire team of people behind them that was cheering them on as they got onto that stage, instead of just having, one person. And I remember, I think it was Amy, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but she said when they were backstage, when it got to the night of, she was like, I think this is the most fun time that we've gotten to have with each other. Whereas before, the night of was probably the most high stress, which there was probably still that stress because now we've got an audience. But at the same time, there was a little bit more of that fun because they were in it together instead of on their own, maybe with one coach behind them.
And for me, like watching that from the sidelines, I think I shared with you earlier, just they were so open to this coaching experience, right? And not only they refined their message, their presence, and their impact that their talks were having, but they built so much rapport with each other that I think towards like the 4th coaching, the peer coaching session, a co-working session, they were putting music, like they all put their soundtracks together, like songs that they loved that pumped them up, and they put like a whole list together. They shared it on socials. Like they really created that mini community and supported each other. And which the peer coach or the group coaching, like how do you think that coaching norms could influence group coaching sessions? Like, do you guys host group coaching sessions, and do you see those norms being challenged when you do those? What are your thoughts on group coaching sessions?
So I do a lot of group coaching, sort of thematic for the denomination that I do a lot of work for. So it might be all people new to their role. It might be all people focusing on a specific area. And it's sort of like the wildfire type, someone will have an idea, or maybe like telephone, right? Someone will have an idea and well, you could do this and that would grow there. And there's always one that won't work for my context. Okay, what will work for your context? How does that adapt? And again, hope I'm not getting too off on a tangent, but I actually said to Mark as we were leaving the auditorium last Tuesday night, I said, you know what ICF needs to do is offer cohorts for people to sign up for after this, like the so what, the now what, the I heard these great ideas. Let's not take that little notebook where I jotted down notes and put it in a file and get lost in the everyday, right? Let's keep taking those notes I wrote and, oh, what could that grow into? What are some goals? How would that look in my context? So, we all have these great ideas. We go to these amazing conferences and then the ideas go in the file folder because we've got, I don't know, HR people. I'm not an HR person, but they probably have payroll, right? They probably have performance reviews. And suddenly these great innovative ideas have not had the chance to see the light of day and grow.
And I love that, Becky, because that is exactly where our vision is growing with Disrupt HR Rochester. We want it to be more than this one time a year event. We want it to be, and this conversation today, it's kind of that extension of taking another step outside of the fun evening that we had together, a week ago. It's how can we start having these conversations. So we actually did an amazing collaboration with the National Human Resource Association locally here, the NHRA chapter, last September, where we brought 3 of our speakers back and we dove into the how and the implementation aspect. And, it was a great panel discussion that got really into the, how do I bring this now in my organization? How do I challenge the norms? Because the 5 minutes are not enough. They're powerful, right? They ignite that thought, but you're right. I think we do need those conversations to go deeper. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think you're right, because I think, the whole theme of igniting the future, a fire starts from something being ignited, 2 rocks or a match, something lights the fire, but then we have to, kind of fan that ignited fire into flames, and so what's the next part where we see these kinds of like winds of change, if I can say that, blowing through the Rochester community that allows for what was ignited last Tuesday now becomes even more, because it's now gotten a lot of oxygen and good life to it to really kind of roar, as they say, a roaring fire.
And us, Coach, we love a good metaphor, so I'm going to roll right with this. So when you think about, Alita, you asked about like the coaching norm. So there is this fire, but there also has to be a little bit of a controlled burn aspect to it. Within those group coaching opportunities, there has to be, and that's our role as a coach, is to make it a controlled burn where it doesn't go completely out of control, but that we remember what the purpose is. Usually that's something that has been co-created between the coach and the team. What are we focusing on? What is our goal here? So that when the burn starts to get a little outside of those boundaries and gets a little dangerous, we can say either, okay, well, this is what we agreed to talk about or focus on. Do we want to bring it back over here? Or is this something that's just as important and we need to shift gears and give this a little bit of time and space? And so there is that setting of boundaries around how we're going to operate together. When we did the feedback, we had a very specific set of questions that we were answering for each coach. So there is structure within this freedom so that we can still serve the team.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know one of the things that I do with groups when I coach them, usually when I'm coaching is in the context of an organization. So these are people who work together. We do a team alliance. So the alliance will look at things like, all right, what kind of atmosphere do we need here? And trust and respect come out in that, and honesty. And then what do we do in terms of when things start to get rough? So how do we want to, deal with that aspect of when things are getting rough? And then how do we want to hold ourselves accountable? So we look at, different aspects of like trying to form a team alliance so that we are living by some of the same rules, I'll say, in that space as we are being coached and coaching.
And you're making me think of the talk that Jen did about it was specific on communication and kind of coaching leaders how they can create more employee first communication type strategies. And I feel like she touched a little bit on what you're talking, Mark, like, how do you support leaders so that they can create that respect and that trust with their employees through communication.
Alina, can I add one more thing?
Yes, yeah.
So, Mark, you're talking about like, okay, what happens when things get a little bit rough, and how do we want to be, who do we want to be in those moments? And the whole idea of Disrupt HR in general is to disrupt our thinking, to think about, okay, how can we do things completely differently? And what I think that pre-thinking about what we don't like about the idea is acknowledging that these ideas are not easy, and it's not going to just be all sunshine and rainbows. And we don't expect it to be that way. We expect there to be some friction. And so how can we understand that, yes, I love this idea of casting against type. And I'm not just going to be able to go and do this without any kind of challenges. So let's think about those challenges beforehand so that we know how we want to be, how we want to deal with that when that comes, so that we can not get completely stuck and have our fire snuffed out in that moment.
Nice.
And you did mention the pre-mortem versus post-mortem, right? Like that could be something that we could kind of catch at a pre-mortem when you start thinking about what could go wrong, what are the risks here, what are the things that we need to think about implementing, or the approaches that we're going to take before we implement. A lot of change management. It to me goes to behavior change and emotions, and also managing change in organizations, especially if it's like a big change like that. How do you inspire hiring? You probably need training for your employees, your leaders, your hiring managers, and a process of how you approach it and continue to challenge your thinking.
And back to your talking about Jen's talk about communication.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. Where are you filling in those blanks that people generate themselves if you don't, especially when something new is happening? And how do you fill in those blanks, to Jen's point, in a way that folks want those blanks filled in?
Yes, because I think as coaches, what we are trying to do, like when she was talking about like the newsletter, that you're getting feedback from, that they don't have to opt in, in this whole newsletter thing, but that if we cultivate a newsletter in a way that comes from them as to what they are exactly looking for from the different perspectives, there's going to be more of that opting in and staying with it. And so the same thing for coaching, especially when we were coaching a group of people. There's one thing to go in with the process and the procedure and give that to them and say, this is how this will solve your problem. And then there's a certain outcome that can come with that. But if we go in as coaches and we help kind of cultivate the soil that allows them to grow the seed of what they think might be the solutions to it, then there could be more investment on their own part. That I came up with this idea, Mark didn't, but I did, as the employee came up with this idea. And so I have somewhat of an investment in this because of that. That for me as a coach is like, okay, I'm doing my good work then, because I'm helping them, creating a space where they can really allow this stuff to come up and out of them, kind of a bit like the fire, that, okay, I think this is what we should try. and that whole pre-mortem thing, we try this and what happens to it? We get to play around with it in this like lab experiment, but then they're the ones that have this investment in it and some kind of, kind of sweat in the game, so to speak. And because of that, then it has, I think, more meaning to them than maybe just getting Mark's 5 steps to whatever it is.
So we have about 15 more minutes or so, and I want to make sure that each of you have a chance to share maybe one key takeaway as to how you believe coaching disrupts and transforms.
I'm happy to start. I keep thinking back to Becky's point about wisdom and collective wisdom. And in the same way that Disrupt HR helps to tap into the collective wisdom of our community, as coaches, our job is to help our clients to tap into their own wisdom that sometimes we just don't get the time and space to do. And, Mark, you talked about this being almost like this sacred space. And that's what I think of when you see someone really getting in touch with their intuition and all of that wealth of knowledge that they have that can completely disrupt their thinking or those patterns.
And I think I'd even to piggyback on that, to recognize their own wisdom, to allow their own wisdom to kind of come to the surface, and also to trust their own wisdom, in that way of maybe I can do this. I often, when I'm talking with a new client, I say, how many times have you had that retreat or gone to that conference and like I said earlier, you take the notes and you put them in the file folder, or you have the staff retreat and you've got all those big, huge Post-it sheets around and everyone's written their ideas. And at the end, we roll them up and we put them in a rubber band. So how can we unroll them? How can we, what would it be like to stop having the same conversation every year and instead move to figuring out how to act on that conversation we've had numerous times so we can move forward? And maybe we decide, that's been a great conversation, but that's not ever going to be a reality. But at least then you've said, oh, okay, we're going to check that off the list. But maybe you'll say, well, actually, to do that, we just need to do this, this, and this. And what does that look like? And that's where I think the goal setting and accountability and all those things that I think we all love about coaching, because it disrupts it disrupts these patterns that we've fallen into, where we get in this loop of idea, conversation. Yeah, let's table that. Idea, conversation. Let's just put a pin in that. Idea, conversation. That's going in the parking lot for this meeting. Oh my gosh. Get it out of the parking lot. Let it see the light of day. Let it disrupt and let it transform.
I love that word, transform, because I think when it comes to coaching, we can certainly be somewhat tactical or technical. We can get in some of that in our conversations with our coaching clients. But we really love the space when we can get into that transformational space, to be able to kind of be disruptive into going into that uncomfortable zone and be able to try things out. One of the things that a coach in the Rochester community said recently that I heard that I thought, this is so great, I'm going to use this. A lot of times for coaching, at the end of our conversations, part of being a coach is also being the accountability partner. So our clients are giving us and telling us what they're going to do between now and our next appointment. And so we are the accountability partner. This is what you're going to be accountable to me to do. She said in I think a webinar that she may have gone to, that instead of holding her clients accountable, she's going to hold them capable. And I think that's a very different mindset for me as a coach, to hold my clients capable of anything that they think they want to do or say, to, ignite and disrupt themselves, their organization, their teams, their families, whatever it is that they want to do. I'm going to hold them in a space of capability, which is much different than a space of accountability, because now what it's hopefully saying to them is, even back to, I think, what Becky was just saying, I trust you. I believe in you, and I just have this great amount of confidence in you that you're going to be able to do what you say you're going to be able to do. And you're going to come back to me, and you're going to have all this great experience around what you said you were going to do. And it might even show you something different that you weren't even expecting. And that's great, because that in itself is disruptive, because it was a total surprise if that's what happened to you. Great, then let's do that. Let me hold you capable of anything that you want that I can help you with as your coach. So for me, I think coaching has this incredible ability to, because one of the last things that I heard in the Disrupt HR last week was in the AI presentation was HR, and going back to one of Becky's words, is the architects of human thriving. And I love that idea that we can, as coaches, also be part of that architectural building of humans who are going to thrive in whatever they want to thrive in, so that we become these architects of capability and thriving and igniting, and celebrating all of it all together.
I love that. And so the AI talk is where Ernan and Sean, they interviewed people in the beginning of the event, while people were having drinks and food, and they went and asked them a few questions, and then fed it all into AI tools. And within an hour or so, they created this 5-minute AI, real-time AI Disrupt HR talk with images, with voiceover, and really a storyline that included all the interviews from the participants in the beginning of the event. And I love what you just said, because the HR people are the architects of human thriving. And I love how I call that the coach's credo, like that I believe in you, I believe in who you are and what you can do. And I think that is an ICF, the coach's credo is an ICF standard, right? And shifting from that accountability mindset to the capability mindset is really, really powerful. And as we close, what is the one thing that you want to leave the audience with? Because to me, that is like my biggest takeaway from this conversation. I think like we need to have a whole different podcast episode on, holding people accountable versus holding people capable. That's a whole different, talk. But what is one thing you would like to leave the audience with?
So I'm not sure this is the one thing I want to leave the audience with, although what struck me was when you were talking about AI, and was it Erman and Sean who that, AI created this talk that I think everyone in the room was both awed and slightly frightened by. But it was the questions that were given to AI that were able to kind of produce it. And in some ways, I think coaching is like, and I mean, again, not to make coaching take more credit than it deserves, but I think the hope of every coach is that we will listen well enough, know our clients well enough, read them in a way that we can ask a question that can help them launch something that's kind of amazing. So maybe what I would leave the audience with is, what are the questions you're asking, and are they the right ones, and are they the powerful ones? And maybe a coach could help you think about some questions in a different way.
And to build on that, if nothing else, to find yourself a space where you can think about those questions and answer them from a place of, we've talked a lot about curiosity here and exploration instead of this is the middle of my day and I have a million other things that I'm thinking of. Can you find that space to just expand your thinking?
I think coaching is, there are two ways that it was kind of explained to me. So when you hear the word coach, you can think of, um, athletics and sports. There's a coach there. And I think that a coach from that perspective is someone also who's very inspiring and motivating. That's, that your cheerleader and has got your back and is going to really be right there for you in what you want to do and how you want to excel at something. And I think that's certainly an aspect of coach. The other thing that the coach, when we think of it, is also the stagecoach. So in the Old West, the mode of transportation that would get you from the stagecoach would get you from point A to point B. And I think for me as a coach, that stagecoach is you, the client. So I get to kind of ride in that coach, ride with you and get to experience you inside and out in terms of like the totality of you and really have a nice experience of who you are and hold that in a space of, this capability that we talked about and exploration and inspiration so that you can take this journey with another person like a coach and myself or any one of us and maybe go into some of those places that you've never gone before. That's a great place to go to. I think, especially those of us who might be like, we like to explore, we do that on vacations and things. We go exploring. Great. You can do the same thing in coaching too. And it's a much deeper experience too, to be able to go into that space for yourself. I don't want people to think it's always going to be this deep, meaningful conversations. That's great when they can be, but it can also be very action oriented too. So you can certainly dip into the pool of that deep exploration, because I think self-awareness is a key component to being to getting coached, that it really helps create, helping you as a client to really delve deeper into your own self-awareness. But the other part of that is the self-management or the self-regulation. So then what are you going to do with that self-awareness? How are you going to show up in your daily life as a human person, as a leader, as a family member, as a friend? You're going to be showing up with a different level of awareness for yourself. And I think that's what coaching really creates at the individual level and also at the team level.
Wow, you guys, I don't want to have to end this conversation. Like I'm loving this so much. This is amazing. I've been taking notes throughout the session, but we've been talking, wow, quite a few things here. We've talked about inspiring and igniting thought and how, we talk about premortems and postmortems and active listening and how the thought-provoking questions can truly ignite and inspire. And, we've talked about emotional triggers, how they can spread like wildfires. I love that analogy there, and how intentional pauses are important, and disrupting patterns, trusting their own wisdom. Oh my, so many things and so many good nuggets that you all shared. I'm very honored to be in this conversation and moderate, but you guys, I'm also very excited to be in your circle and grateful to have you, as coaches in our area, and that you support teams and organizations to really transform what they do and use coaching as a means to, shift how they do work. Because that's really where, for me, looking at these cultures shift and transform, it's really where my passion lies. So thank you all for being part of this conversation. If you want to connect with an ICF coach, make sure you reach out to Mark directly or in your ICF website, Mark, right? ICFupstateNY.com.
Yes. And my email address is president@icfupstateny.com.
And please feel free to reach out to Becky and Caitlin for any support you need as well. And if you want to learn more about Disrupt HR Rochester, you can visit our website at disrupthrroc.org. But thank you for listening to this amazing conversation, and keep disrupting. Keep disrupting. Once a disruptor, always a disruptor, right?
Always a disruptor.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alina.
Thanks. It's been fun.